Almost single-handed, Jim Thompson created the Thai silk industry for an international market. In doing so, he became a legend, one that has continued to grow after his mysterious disappearance in 1967. The company he founded, the Thai Silk Company, still produces high-quality textiles and has become a world-renowned brand. This is the story of the man and the legend.
Jim was very successful because he wasn't a businessman. I think if he was a businessman, perhaps he would have went bankrupt or became very discouraged with the people he was working with. He had many heartbreaks, and I think Jim never took that to heart. It was like his temperament. Maybe some disaster took place, but afterwards Jim just could carry on after that.
The one thing about Jim is that he had a great eye for color, which I think is a gift.
He developed my sense of color. And one thing he did was he put colors together that nobody in their right mind would have put together then. Now we're familiar with putting purple and orange together and yellows and reds, which really don't go together. Jim had an innate sense, which he said really came from the Thai combination of colors. He just improved upon it.
First and foremost, he was a colorist, and a great colorist. He was not a weaver. The particular color that ran through most of the fabrics were magenta pinks, brilliant pinks, shocking pinks, and what was also called Siamese pink. That pink was the navy blue of Thailand.
Thailand had weaving from hundreds of years ago, and when Jim Thompson arrived, they were weavers, and they were making small pieces of fabric that would be enough to make a garment or enough for some local use. But no one ever thought to make a 40-yard roll of fabric or to make it in a Western style design. And that all began with Jim Thompson. And if someone like Jim Thompson had not arrived, I'm not sure that today you would find silk all over the world. That it was really because of the way he approached the styling and the design and the color of it that made it so popular worldwide.
Jim was very generous. I mean, he may have never had any money on him, but he was generous in the sense of his time. He was a showman. Jim was a party animal, and like pretty girls, I think he was much more lonely than people ever thought he was. Just because a person enjoys going to parties and entertaining doesn't necessarily mean that they're not lonely, even though he's surrounded by a crowd. You got a false impression of him. He did indeed like solitude. He was very contented, just sitting, doing nothing, not talking, not being funny, not entertaining. And this is the paradox. They thought he was a big party animal, played the part very well.
I would say Jim was gracious. Jim was urbane. Jim was passionate. Jim was charming. Jim was cosmopolitan.
Jim struck women, or struck me, as a sort of very kind, sort of avuncular type person. He was a very gentle man, very, very kind man. He wasn't sort of someone who liked high drama. He had incredible good taste, and everybody really liked him a lot. I sort of impressed he never learned how to speak Thai, and it didn't seem to bother him, and it didn't bother anybody else either, really. And he sort of got away with it.
I thought he was impossibly glamorous. He was at St. Paul's and Princeton. Then he did not graduate from the University of Pennsylvania Architectural School because he couldn't pass calculus. He was the debutante's delight. He would take me to dinner. There was always a beautiful blonde in tow who was not happy to see me, and I'd have dinner and go home. When he went in the Army, he was in the Balkans. He was in Egypt. He was in a lot of hush-hush type places. He was in the OSS. oh so secret and oh so social, which is what we called it. You know that famous story, he was supposed to parachute drop into Bangkok and peace was declared, so he landed. People have said he was a communist, he was a spy, he was a CIA man. Nonsense. He was a very old-fashioned American patriot.
Jim told me that his first interest was not in the Thai Silk Company, but in the restoring the Oriental Hotel, which was in a pretty bad condition at that time. He said when he went abroad to settle his affairs, the people who were in the group squeezed him out, so he was looking for something else to do, and he had been looking at the silk and sending some to friends. His idea was not so much to sell the silk in Thailand, but to export it. At that time there was a big shortage of silk, so he thought maybe Thai silk could be revived and he could export it.
Many people often say that Jim gave rebirth to a dying silk industry. That is not exactly correct. The silk industry in Thailand was very vibrant. Almost every other household had a weaving loom. The industry was a cottage industry. It was domestic. It was not commercialized to any degree.
He took really a moribund craft and woven silk cloth, and he promoted it. And I don't know anybody else who's ever done that. I was with him one time in Bangkok where a weaver had a basket of bobbins, different colors. And Jim would pick the bobbins out of the basket, and I suggested a different alternating color. And he said, "No, nephew, you'll never be a colorist." He knew what he had on the loom up here. You can't work with the people who produce the product. You might as well forget about what a genius you are in marketing. He knew how to work with the Thais.
I said to him one day, "Jim, how about if we open the house to raise money for the School for the Blind?" Jim thought it over, and he said, "I'll let you open the house 2 days a week, from 9 until 1. It became exceedingly popular, and we made hundreds of thousands of baht for the School for the Blind. It really was so successful, and the School for the Blind improved so much, and it also helped with the Thais understanding that blind people could be educated, could become useful citizens in the world. And he was so supportive of it. I mean, Jim would be willing to help anybody if they came to him and explained what they needed.
After the war, tourists were very slow in coming back to Bangkok. And Jim heard that the Coronia was coming into Bangkok, and that was his beginning, he said. And he went down to the dock. He draped himself in this Thai silk, and he shouted to people as they came down the gangway, "Come with me, I'm the Pied Piper." And then after that, Bloomingdale's made a shower curtain, which he thought was absolutely incredible. I think they had a show, must have been I can't remember, in the 50s sometime, of a lot of Jim's things in Bloomingdale's.
Jim started collecting, I think, almost as soon as he came to Thailand, and began collecting porcelain, particularly Bencharong, porcelain made in China only for export to the kings of Thailand, and Chinese blue and white. And became an obsession with him. He would spend every free day, every Sunday, going to the market, buying that. He would go to Nakhon Kasem, which is down in Chinatown. Most antique shops in those days were down in Chinatown, and he knew most of the dealers.
He collected beautiful things. He just had that instinct of being able to pick the most interesting and the best.
He had a very good background in what he did. He was an architect, so I think he could lay things out like his house. He was a stage setting designer, or had a background in that. So when you look at the house, you can see the way the objects are placed around the house. It is like a stage play. It is like it's waiting for somebody to walk in the door and sit down and just admire everything, which one does.
His house is a Thai house, but as seen through the eyes of a Western architect. And he's put it together in a non-conventional way. And then it did, in fact, have appeal in a Western world.
Going to dinner at Jim's house was wonderful. We hadn't seen his house finished. I saw it in the process of being built. So that first night when we arrived, and down the stairs came this terribly elegant man, always dressed in Thai silk. Coming out through the foyer, do you remember it had black and white marble on the floor, and the lights were always slightly dim. And he led us through the marble hallway and up the stairs with that wonderful warm smile on his face, saying, "How wonderful that you could come," as if we were doing him a great favor. Past all those wonderful old Thai prints, and we got to the top and walked out on the terrace, and it was dark and it was lovely. And we sat for a few minutes in that drawing room. The air was soft. You can't explain tropical air until you've experienced it. It was the magic kingdom. There were lights in the trees. It was one of life's magic moments, and I've never forgotten it. And we sat and we talked. I don't remember what we talked about. It just flowed. And when it was over, you felt as though you had really entered some kind of Neverland.
A tourist today going through that house doesn't really get any idea of the magic. That house has to be seen at night.
And of course, the house was perfect for entertaining. It was all set up for that. So I think there were very few nights where Jim dined alone.
He was Toastmaster of Bangkok. There was no influential tourists who came through. There weren't many, but they all met Jim Thompson. They bought silk, and they were invited home to supper.
People went because it was the place in Bangkok where you wanted to be. Everybody who was going to be worth meeting, who was visiting, was going to be there. So it was always full of life, full of surprise.
Ethel Merman, oh, I love this. Ethel Merman sang Hello Cocky to him the other day, which pleased him no end. She also had a duet with Laurie, and he did invite her. This was before her divorce. She was en route home from Sydney via Bangkok.
Might have even been the same night. Ted Kennedy was there with his wife, Joan, which was interesting. He brought all of his Democratic cronies with him. And it was really an exciting party to see all of these young men. His wife was fascinated by the house. And we were chatting, and I started to show her the bedroom and the study. And we were in the study, and she was looking, and she said, "But this house is so beautiful." She said, "Just a minute, I have to get Teddy." And she walked out, over the lintels that went into the study. And she called him and she said, "Teddy, Teddy, you've got to come and see this." He didn't stop talking, and she came back and she very sadly said, "Here he is in the most beautiful house in Thailand, and he doesn't know where he is."
A lot of the entertaining went on the terrace, where you looked back at that wonderful big living room and the soft lights and everything.